I'm going to measure out the 24 inches. Hopefully I can do this with one hand. We'll see how that goes. Okay. Hello, it's Henry with Woodworking by LPI. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to our continuing series of woodworking tips and tricks. More primarily to a wood sign perspective, but woodworking in general as much as I could, throw it in there. What are we talking about today? Well, today I've kind of gone over a lot of things with regard to the creation of wood signs, but kind of thought now is a good time for me to show you the process, you know, A to Z. I get my my orders in, and I process these signs, and I do quite a few. You don't see them on the video. I don't do them as much, but I kind of wanted to, before I did this, break it out to a lot of the different things. So to be honest with you, so I could reference them in this video as we move along. So I'm looking for this to be a two-part video. First part being the selection of the wood, the job itself, and the all the way through to painting. So we're going to get the board, prep it, and then get it on the CNC. We're going to carve that, and then get it to paint. So that's basically what we're going to do today. If you get a chance, you might want to take a look at our homepage and the rest of our YouTube videos, and take a look at those. And I'll be referencing them as I go along. All the stuff that I've referenced up to this point, with each step as we go along. But I get my order in, and then I put it in my VCarve Pro software, and then I create the job. Okay, so we're going to take it from there moving forward. Okay, when I do my my VCarve Pro job, I print out this worksheet, and what this does is this helps me keep track in my head all the orders that comes in. And it gives me a lot of details. It gives me a picture of what the final result is going to be, as well as measurements and the material that I'm using, time for carving, and things like that, and pertinent information. In this case here, this is a client sign that I'll be carving for you for this video. A little bit on organization perspective, I have a four-part folder that I have here. And this is how I keep them separated. In the front, I have the jobs that I'm doing that are to be carved, and then in the next section I move it to the jobs that have been completed. And as you can see, well, we've been a little busy. And then I have extra notes and things in the back with regard to jobs or conversations with customers. So this is a good tip to kind of keep yourself organized. If you don't have the VCarve Pro software, I highly recommend it. I mentioned it in the CNC videos, part 1 and 2, as to approximately what it will cost, and you can get more detail on it there. But this is the job sheet that I pull out and I bring to the wood shop, so I know what I'm carving. Okay, so I got my my worksheet, and I have my chip that I downloaded the G-code to, which is the software VCarve Pro produces that I use over on the CNC. So what we'll do is we'll get the selection of the board, and I'll show you that, and then we're going to hop over to the CNC. So let's go to the next step. So you, gosh, it's been warm. So you know about the job, you know about the worksheet, and you know what I'm referencing when I do the job for the client, and I have an idea what it looks like. So all right, so we'll go from there. I got that, and then I have my boards. Now the wood material that I use, I get from various sources. Okay, sometimes I get it from the big box stores like Lowe's or Home Depot, and sometimes I get it from the mill. It really depends on what the job is for. Majority of the time I use pine. It's the most flexible and soft wood that I use. It really brings out the color and the grain, and you'll see that later in the video as we go along. But it's a natural look, which is what we try to promote within the wood signs. It's all natural. It's actual wood, and it's all natural. We like that natural look. Some people call it primitive. Some people call it other things. I call it natural. So we'll go from there. This is the typical board that we would use right here. This is 11 1/4. We get them in 6-foot runs, 8-foot runs in length rather. Sometimes up to 12 feet, depending upon what the prices are. The prices in lumber here have been, wow, they've been really going through the roof. I think they're beginning to settle down a little bit, but that's due to all the wonderful stuff that's been going on in the world lately. And so the price of lumber is not too ugly. This in here is typically 11 1/4, 11 1/2 wide. We call it a 12, and then I cut it in segments depending upon the job. On the worksheet, this job here, it calls for a 24 by 9. Okay, so we're going to be cutting the length at 24, and then after the job is completed, I'll cut it down to a 9, and we'll go from there. Okay, so kind of a little background on that lumber and where I get it. Like I said, Lowe's, Home Depot, and sometimes a mill. There's a couple mills around here that I partake to, or I go to rather, and I get specific types of species of wood. Okay, but in this case, it's a generic pine. So let's go to the next step. Let me get this cut, and I'll take you along with me on that. Okay, so here I'm at my miter saw, and I mentioned in previous videos that this miter saw I use a lot. Probably every day that I'm out here, I'm using this multiple times. It's one of my primary tools that I use. I haven't done a video on it. I've mentioned the fact, I think, in a couple of videos that I might do one on it, but if you want me to do more of a video on how I use this tool, let me know in the comments, and I'll get a video done on this and what it's capable of doing and what I use it for. But back to the sign. Okay, so I have the material here. Hopefully you can see all that. I have the material laid out here as to what I'm going to use, and you can see there's a blemish. There's a blemish right down here, and there's a couple of knots. I'm not overly concerned. I'm not overly concerned about the knots from the carving perspective if they're small, specifically if they're flat. They add character, from my perspective, to the sign. So I'm going to measure out the 24 inches. Hopefully I can do this with one hand. We'll see how that goes. Okay. Okay, so some of the lumber that you get in, you know, from some of the box stores and such, or even the mills sometimes, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's square on the end. It's crucial that you have a square on the end, and it's true, because that's what you take all your measurements for when you put it on the CNC. So I mentioned in a previous video, I still use the old square. This is my dad's old square, which is why I keep it around from a sentimental perspective, but also from a use perspective, and I'm always using this. So I'm going to make sure that the end here is square. If not, I'll trim it off to make sure that it is completely square. So we'll do that real quick. Okay, and I previously had cut that down so I know it's square, but I wanted to show you how I would do that. And of course, if it's not, and it's at a slight angle, that square will point it out in a heartbeat. There are other ways of doing that. But that's the quickest, the simplest, as well as the easiest. And I'm all about, you know, being simple. Okay, so I'm going to try and measure this with one hand. Hopefully that works. Okay, so I'm going to take it down here, and I'm going to measure this out. And if you didn't see my video on how to read tape measures, I have a video. Like I said, I'm going to mention videos along the way, and I have a video out there on how to read tape measures. So. I'll put that in the description, and it'll show you how that worked out. Okay, so I'm going to measure this out. The board is supposed to be 24 inches long, so I'm going to mark this off right here. And I put the mark at an angle outward on the outside of the cut. That tells me that you know, the side of the job that I'm doing, the piece of wood. The piece of wood that I'm using for the job, and the piece of wood that I'm not using. Okay, so that's why the mark. Okay, so I'm going to cut this, and then I'll get right back. Okay, now I got the piece cut right here. I'm going to talk about the wood just a little bit, and then how I prepare it for the acceptance of the job. And I'm going to put my nitro gloves on here. These gloves are a lifesaver. They protect your hands from paint, the sealer, all kind of stuff, but yet give you the flexibility rather, to be able to work as if it's your own skin. Does that make sense? I guess, yeah, right. But anyway, so these are the gloves that I use. I use the nitro gloves. I'll put a link for that down there also. I believe I've mentioned these in another video. You're probably going to hear me say that 20 times. I apologize, but these I use for pretty much everything. So I'll put that away. Now, there's a couple things that I look at with regard to the board to make sure that it's going to work well. Some of them things are pretty obvious. This one here, I want to make sure that it's obviously a flat board, and I want to make sure that it doesn't have any bows in it. And as you can see, it is pretty flat, and it doesn't have any bows into it. It doesn't have any really apparent bad knots and marks on it. Some of the jobs that I do also not only just the front, but also do the back. Okay, and if I was to use it for this, it would be okay as far as going on that as well. Some of your folks may not like using it with that type of knot in there, but to be honest with you, actually they come out really nice. So maybe I kind of push the limits just a little bit, but it really shows up nice once you get to the final product. Okay, so I have my sanding sealer, and then I'm going to mark this for sealing it, and once I go from there, we'll after we get it drying, we'll get to carving. But let me show you what the sanding sealer looks like. Okay, this is a Minwax product. Okay, I'm not endorsed by Minwax or anything. I'm just showing this to you, for this is what I use, and it's kind of a white, liquidy. I hope you can see that. I don't know if you can or not. Substance, and what it does is it seals the wood, so when I go to apply paint, it doesn't go down into the grain of the wood. And I know that probably doesn't make sense, but if you've ever painted something or carved something and you painted it, and then you go back to sand it, you see that all the lines and the grooves and the grains of the wood, you can't, no matter how much you sand, you can't get it out. Well, this here prevents you from doing that. It's called bleeding. I apply the sanding sealer on here ahead of time before I carve, so when I go to paint it, it keeps it from bleeding into the grain of the wood. So really good tip on that. So let me get to sand sealing this. Oh, I also, this is something I made up. If it's going to be a one-sided board, I typically just draw an X on it. And the reason I draw an X on it is because I do a lot of signs, and I do a lot of pre-work on these, and I set them over on the shelf, so that way when I'm ready to carve, I just pull them off the shelf and I'm carving them. But here I'm showing you the whole process, but I do a lot of pre-work and prep for this. I put an X on it to tell me that I'm only doing, this is only sand sealed on one side. If, for example, I had a back message on this board, I would be marking it with a B, and that tells me that both sides are sand sealed. Okay, so you can make a lot of marks on these, and you'll sand it off when you get there, but it helps me distinguish between the boards. Okay, a little bit of a tip there. Okay, so I'm going to take the sanding sealer, and I'm going to use my foam brush. I'm going to let it soak in just a little bit. You really don't need a thick layer on it. You're just looking to seal it. So what I do is I start in the middle, and I always go with the grain. And you really, to be honest with you really can't see it unless you look at it in an angled light, and you see it's wet. So I'm going to make sure that the whole board on the face is covered that I'm going to be carving on. And this is all that preparation work that you do to prevent the paint from bleeding into the grain. And I know this seems like such a simple little thing, but believe me, like I said, if you've ever tried to paint wood after you've carved and you haven't put a sanding sealer on it, you get all these lines of paint in the grain. And it's really annoying because you have to sand forever to get them out. Sometimes they don't come out at all. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I'm going to go with the grain on that, and I'm just going to smooth it over, just a thin layer, like so. Okay, and I don't know if you can see, see it, but you really can't see it at all. It's really clear. And then I have my X down here on the bottom, telling me it's done one-sided. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry. It takes about 15-20 minutes to dry. I'll set it off to the side, and then when we get it back, we'll throw it on the carver with the job, and we'll continue. We'll be right back. Okay, so now I'm over by the CNC, and I've mounted the board on the base here. I forget what that's called. Mounted it on the base, and I've tacked it down with the holders here to make sure that it's flat, make sure that it's completely square, and I'm getting ready to carve. So I'm going to put the carver over here on datum, and then get started with carving the job. Okay. A lot of this detail that I'm going to gloss over right now is contained within the CNC videos part 1 and 2 for your information. Like I said I was going to mention a lot of videos, so hopefully that helps you out. Excuse me. Hopefully that helps you out with regard to more detail. This here is just to show you the continual process all the way through from A to Z. So I'm going to load up my my job here with the worksheet into the software, and then we'll get going. Okay, as you can see, the CNC carving job is done, and what we're going to do on the last part of this part 1 of 2 videos for creating a wood sign, I'm going to remove it from the CNC. We're going to take it over to the workbench, and we're going to get some paint on it and talk about some details with regard to the paint. So let's get moving. Okay, so I got the sign over here to the workbench, and what I'm looking to do is there's some prep work that has to be done prior to me painting it. Okay, for first, well, first things first, I can't talk today. First things first, I need to cut it down to size. So I'm going to make sure that it is the correct width as well as the correct height on the sign. We're going to get it cut first, and then once that's completed, we'll take care of the edge, because this customer wants a coved edge on the edge of this board. And then from there, we're going to throw some paint on it. So we'll get cracking at it. Okay, so first I'm going to get my tape measure, and I know that this is a 9 by 24. Okay, so I'm going to cut this down to size, but in actuality what I'm going to do is I'm going to match it up on the sides here. And I know this is just a hair below 1 inch. So what I'm measuring is, I'm measuring the distance between here and the edge, and I want it to match on the opposite side. So I'm going to take the measurement here, and I'm going to measure, it is 7/8. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to measure out 7/8. And I'm going to mark that for cut. And then I also know that it's 9 inches tall, but I want the bottom to match the top again. So I'm going to mark off the bottom here, and the bottom appears to be just a hair over a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to mark that off as well. Okay, so I got my 2 marks. I'm going to go to the miter saw and I'm going to cut this up, cut it off, and then we'll get to the edge. So, okay, so now the board is beginning to look a little bit more like the finished product. Okay, what we've done is we've matched the size on each one, so we have equal lengths on each side, and it is a rectangular, and it's approximately 9 by 24. Okay, which is what we want. But basically we want to make sure that the carving is centered and we have equal lengths along the side. Okay, you're always going to eyeball no matter what step that you're in, and the step right now that we're in is prepping for paint. So now that we got that done, okay, we're going to put a coved edge on this. As I mentioned, the customer wants a coved edge, so I'm going to put on my safety equipment, and then we're going to put a coved edge on. And if you want to, I have another video, of course, on how I do edges. Okay, but I'm going to show you here how I'm going to do that. So, all right, let's get to it. Okay, so I got the coved edge on. Now you can see I have the coved edge. Okay, and we're carved. Okay, so, you know, again, we're getting closer to the end product here. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to use the brush. Now, the brush was featured in my video of the 5 items that I can't do without. And this is one of the reasons as to why. Because what I do with the brush is I go through and I make sure that there are no burrs or nothing that is caught, you know, in the lettering and all that good fun stuff, you know, that makes sure that so it receives the paint. Okay, and in that same video of the 5 things that I can't do without, I also had that file set, and this is one of those files. Okay, so I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a little bit of a burr inside here and right here, and a little bit at the bottom of the letters. So really what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this file right here, and the file set, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to clean out, and it makes this so much easier to use this file. It's the only thing that I have found that really works really easy. I mean, you can use possibly like a bent over piece of sandpaper or something like that, and you can try lots of things, but to be honest with you, it doesn't work like the file does. The file works really well, and it's super easy, and it's simple. So I'm going to go through here and I'm going to clean out letters, just kind of taking a peek, making sure they're all cleaned out, making sure they're crisp in case the router bit, you know, didn't get it all out. And it has nothing to do with the router bit itself. Sometimes it's the wood. The wood just doesn't want to, you know, clear out as much. So I'm just going to go through here and clean all this out. Okay, we're looking good. All right. So we're getting here. A little at a time. Got one more right there and right there. Okay, I'm going to sand the edges, and then once I sand the edges, and then we'll get to paint. So. Okay, and I want to stress the fact that you don't sand the front. I'm only sanding the edges because I'm wanting to make the edges crisp. Okay, take off any burrs on them whatsoever and make them crisp so the final product looks really, really nice. I'm not sanding the front, and the reason I'm not sanding the front is because when we first started this, we put that sanding sealer down, and that's what's going to protect the wood, the grains of the wood, from the paint that we're getting ready to apply. Okay, so let me get the area all cleaned up here, and then we'll get to paint. Okay, so we got the area all cleaned up. Now we're to the last step of part one, which is applying paint. Now, applying paint, as I mentioned, the sanding sealer is what protects the face of the piece of wood. So the paint will get down in the lettering, and then when you go to sand it off, all you'll take off is the front part, and it'll leave the black paint inside the lettering. You see kind of how important that sanding sealer is. I mean, it's uber important, believe it or not. It's such a small step that, wow, it really makes a huge impact, a big difference. Okay, so I've got my handy dandy Lazy Susan here. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this. First I'm going to lean up against here, I'll get my, my stuff on, and then I'm going to paint this. Now, as mentioned in the prior videos as well, I only use the primer paint. And the primer paint is very good paint to use. Okay, so it's a very good paint. I only use primer. Now there is paint, and then there's primer. So you want to make sure you get the primer. You can get this at Walmart. You can get it on Amazon. I buy it in bulk off of Amazon, and it's easy to sand, and it dries fairly quickly. So it's a good paint to use. Okay, so I'm going to put my equipment back on. I'm going to paint this, and then that'll be the last step wrapped up for part one. You know, it's funny. No matter how many times I paint, there's always a spot that I miss. I've been doing this for years, and I always seem to miss a spot. So when I put it on the Lazy Susan, I'm always looking on top as well as I'm painting the sides to make sure that I get a complete coverage. Okay, so here's what the product looks like at this step of the process. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed part one of 2 parts with regard to creating a sign, creating a wood sign rather, and you can see how all the stuff that I've put together in separate videos to help you out and give you tips and information has culminated into the one process. Each step is important, and it will reflect upon the sign if you don't do them with patience and diligence, and of course to have some fun. You know, that's really what it's all about, is to have fun. Okay, so I'm gonna let this dry, and then we'll get to part 2, which will be the next video in this series that will come out. And again, this is Henry with Woodworking by LPI, and I will see you in the next video.